Welcome everyone. Hope everyone's having a good evening on this end of March stream, one day before April Fool's Day. I'm kind of glad that we didn't land on an April Fool's Day. It's never my favorite thing to deal with. But let's go ahead and add Mr. Connor Eisenmenger here. Oh, and I didn't full screen you, so you're on there, but I didn't do it well. But now it's great, sort of.
Cool.
I'll get it to be a little bit better.
Okay.
If I can figure out where my mouse is. There we go. That should be good. Yeah, I think. Everyone can tell that we're using Zoom right now, but now it's better. Cool. We got it figured out one way or another.
Glad to hear it.
But
We're all set up.
But yes, other than the comments, that we need to get that going. So,
Right.
But hopefully everyone's doing well. We've got I at least have a few pre-planned topics that I'm going to throw at Mr. Eisenmenger here that we can maybe talk about.
Okay.
But as per usual, make sure that you've got whatever questions that you might have. This is your one and only chance until next week to ask us questions. So it's very time sensitive. If you don't get your questions in now, it'll have to wait till next week.
Yeah. You have to wait until we do this exact same thing in 7 days.
Right.
So time is of the essence.
Right. It's really important that you get these questions in now. But yes, we should be live with having questions. Let's see if I can throw this one on here since it's the first one, just to test it out. From our regular Zach. Says, greetings from closer than usual. I'm down in Texas with my extended fam. Yes, it's
nice.
Texas is a big state. You could still be pretty far away from me, but
it's true.
But you're closer than Illinois. I'm pretty sure, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I vaguely remember that from previous things. Ooh, that's a good question right off the bat. Favorite bands of any time, of any genre and era.
Wow. That's a really good question.
Yeah, I don't know that I have a quick answer to that. If you have a quick answer, you can definitely go first.
I have a quick answer for that. I have a two bands that I like for the same reason of very different genres. I will say that I get the same dopamine hit from the Horace Silver Quintet that I do from the Avett Brothers, because both of them, from a structure standpoint, serve the melody and they serve the storytelling that their melodies do. I don't know if Zach is still on the screen to agree with me, but I imagine
I am.
Okay, so you would what do you think about the Horace Silver Quintet as far as like small group, like structure, like what they do?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think they're great. I definitely haven't spent that's not a group that I really did a deep dive on, in my jazz education. It's obviously one that comes up more than a little bit for sure. But I think that more of my Horace Silver knowledge is from, okay, Horace Silver wrote the tune Peace, and it's now I'm gonna go see what recordings I can find of Peace and see what I can do with that. Mm-hmm. So I'll go a slightly different direction, which Connor probably knows one of my answers for this, but probably is surprised that this is the answer that I'm giving, but knows what's in my heart nonetheless. I'm a really big Paramore fan. Especially if we're talking, bands, any genre opens it up for sure. But if we're talking about a band, I gotta say, first few albums of Paramore, first 3 albums, that's really, that really does it for me. I've written many scholarly papers on the works of Paramore. That's not even a joke. Music school, no. Right?
It's fantastic music.
Right, and it's clever. It's got we can use a lot of our good academic words. It's got a lot of good word painting. The album Brand New Eyes has a lot of good word painting. That's one of the topics that I wrote about. And but let's see. Let's answer this next question from Brian. Biggest influences on your sounds and improv language?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. I think we have one that we share. I think the trunks of our trees are pretty similar. And while Zach and I don't always play the same type of music every single day, I bet there's a couple. If we're talking about influences of sound and improv language, that sounds more oriented towards like jazz improvisation, maybe.
Right.
So what would you say? What do you think are the common threads between our playing, Zach?
I mean, I think Marshall Jilks is definitely one that comes up a good bit. I'd say that's more on like, probably more on improvisational language than it is sound. I don't think either of us. I think we tend to play things, especially like upper register things. We tend to play the same sort of, we probably approach it in the way that we think Marshall Jilks is approaching it, which is,
we like to think that we approach it
maybe not
way.
accurate, but definitely thinking about some of like, what's that track, Bear on Sound Stories.
Oh, yeah, such a good one.
And he just like goes up for it's like an A or something. Like
Yeah.
in my head, I definitely like I am Marshall Jilks when I play those high notes. I'm in fact not Marshall Jilks, but yeah, definitely a lot of the language sort of stuff. Because to me it's like he definitely is a jazz trombonist, but it's like it's not common language 24/7. He definitely knows all of that, but I think that's why one of the reasons why I like Marshall Jilks' playing, because it's like it's somewhere in between like common language, jazz, and just really melodic playing. So it's kind of what I like, hope to be. I don't think I quite get there, at least not as effortlessly. As far as sound, I would say that both of us, like if we're talking the tree trunk analogy, probably Steve Davis, a little bit more on your side, but still is like a very common thread between us. Especially on the sound side.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like when I'm playing bop or like just like straight ahead music, the sounds that I hear in my head are like, a lot of those sounds are informed by like Steve Davis's playing, or if we go farther down the train or the tree, of course, like there's lots of Curtis in there, Curtis Fuller, and
some
lots
JJ
of Johnson. Yeah. I mean, when you get down to the trunk of the tree, it's like you can't really play improvised music on a trombone and not like have something be informed or maybe even unknowingly derivative from like JJ and Curtis and the forefathers.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just gonna throw this up here because I can, and no one can stop me. Dude. Thank you, Mr. Twist. Speaking of people who have twist in their name, McTwister, M. Jeffrey. Mystery Jeffrey. It's actually his birthday today, so we'll see if he hops on the stream today. But it is in fact.
He might have better things to do today, but
he might. We're still in a world where people are home more often than they used to be.
Sure.
So
that's very true.
He could be camping. I talked to him actually yesterday, but yeah, we'll see if he hops on here or not. But yes, I thought that. I think that's thinking about the common influences, going back to that. I think we have very similar trombone influences, but then when we get out of trombone, I think we have less common threads. Not that we're against each other or anything, but I think that we like choose to go slightly different paths outside of the like trombone lexicon just a little bit.
I would agree with that, and it'd be impossible for two people to have the same sphere of influence aesthetically, and it would be really boring if they did.
Right. I don't think we would enjoy playing together if we sounded the same.
Yeah, that would be tragic.
Kind of defeats the purpose of playing with others. It's like having a conversation with the mirror. It's just a little pointless. Right. But yeah, that's there's definitely the jazz trombone world is small enough where there are only so many people to list, really. I mean, it's not like we've listed everybody, and we could probably throw like, I think that some of my sound stuff, especially as of like the last like 2 or 3 years, has been more influenced by Elliot Mason. I definitely wouldn't say my language is influenced by Elliot Mason. I don't play the things that he plays, that's vague, but like, you know, I think that like especially the nuances of my playing has kind of gone a little bit more into that direction as of late, you know, especially like his use of like vibrato and just like, I don't know, I kind of think about it as just like redlining the sound sometimes, just like he just like gets in there, you know, and I think that I've done a little bit more of that as of, I think like really like when I was at Northwestern a few years, you know, like 5 years ago, that's when I started like before that point, it's like you couldn't tell me that anyone was better than Marshall Gilks. And then now it's like, oh, there are other people.
Right. I think that like players like Elliot and Vincent and Marshall Gilks, Vincent was someone we haven't talked about who's like, man, like sometimes like when I'm sitting down, I'm just like, man, like what's the coolest thing right now? It's like, man, like sometimes it's just like when Vincent Gardner, like when I'm listening to him play, it's like I have no interest in listening to, playing, or participating in any trombone sound. It's like not that. Like there's just like times where he's playing so convincingly.
Especially that.
That's it.
What's the album where it's all 3 and 4 or 3 and 5 time signature things? Or am I making that up? I mean, is it all 3? Let me see.
You're listening closer than I am to these albums.
Well, it's like it's part of the title of the album.
Oh.
I want to say it's like Waltz is in the title. Maybe I'm making this up. Waltz Hot.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's, you know, if someone wants to sharpshoot me in the comments, I think everything on there is in 3 or 5.
Yeah, I need to go back through that one. But yes, I think what I went to say about Vincent Gardner, Elliot, Marshall, all those, there's been so many really, really good trombone players that have done like the very hard legwork of making the trombone fit aesthetically into what is idiomatically modern, like improvised music of the past like 20 years. I think of like people like Joshua Redman and Mark Turner and Kurt Rosenwinkel and
Donnie McCaslin.
Like that whole school of thought of playing that now takes us into, you know,
like the generation after Jerry Bergonzi sort of saxophone land.
Yeah, it's kind of like you know, I feel like trombone, for it to follow along aesthetically with those big stylistic movements that happen, it has to make its own space. And so those guys like really did the legwork to make that happen. And so if you're going to be playing modern improvised music that goes beyond just like post-bop, then I mean, it's natural. You'd be really hard pressed to think of a sound in your head that's not informed by like that class of players that's been doing it the past 15, 20 years.
Right. I think about it like you have to be able to like do mostly what other people are doing on other, you know, monophonic instruments, but also have your own identity, because it's like a trombone will never be as good of a saxophone as a saxophone. You know, it's like you have to be able to like keep up, play the tempos that people are playing, you know, play similar lines and things, but you also have to have like the instrument itself has to have its like unique identity. Brian's just crushing it with these questions.
Yeah, Brian.
Just like feeding us everything we need for this show. So Brian is the early MVP of this stream. But favorite big bands. So do you want to go first or I can go first?
How about you go first? I think I answered first last time.
I think my favorite big band, I think about it as like it's almost a consistent thing to me. It's like, it's not one big band, but it kind of works as one big band over like 75 years. You know, being like bassy into Thad Jones, Mel Lewis Orchestra, or whatever you call that band. And now you call it the Vanguard. Like in all the different like iterations of that band. Because to me, it's like Thad Jones is an extension of it's like Count Basie, but with like, you know, much more dense harmony, and you know, a lot. But it's not like rhythmically that different than like mid to late Basie. It is a little bit in some ways for sure, but like mostly it's just like harmonically and melodically more complex, or really more dense is probably the easiest way to describe it. What's your answer?
I would say that
I took all the good ones. No, I'm just kidding.
There's so many other ones. I my thoughts on big bands are kind of all over the place. It's like sort of like some people don't have favorite songs; they have like favorite parts of songs that are their favorites. And my philosophy on big band, I think, is kind of similarly disorganized, where like there's like certain lockups that happen between drummers and lead trumpet players on certain tracks that like that's really what I'm listening for.
Right.
I don't really care about the trombone section most of the time. I will say, like, the thing that informs most of my decisions is probably like just like overall band cohesion and good leaders in the trumpet section that are listening to the rhythm section. And I would say 9 times out of 10, if I save a song to like listen back later, it's because Ernie Royal was playing lead trumpet, and like that goes from the Basie Band to otherwise goes to Bastion. The Unpredictable Jimmy Smith big band album is like the most swinginest thing ever, and it's got this great room sound. It's like super super live sounding. I don't know how they recorded it specifically, but along the same lines, and I think it was Ernie Royal again, along with Bastion with Jimmy Smith. That's like just super killing album. I think Ernie Royal played lead trumpet on the Oscar Peterson Nat King Cole tribute album, which plays out in kind of that Carnegie Hall concerto concert style, where it's like small piece, big piece, small piece, big piece, or big, small, big, small. I can't remember which one it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Anyways, big band, I'm pretty sure is Ernie Royal playing lead trumpet on that. I'll need to go back and check. I could be wrong. But that one is good for the same reasons.
And I think especially for like what you're talking about, there are a handful of like big bands that have like been around for so long and have all of these different albums and things. But then there's also like a famous jazz musician who has one big band album. There is a McCoy Tyner big band. No one really talks about it, but it exists, and there's French horn on it. But it's like that's the sort of thing. Like a lot of the players end up being the same. It's like a different hodgepodge of players and things, but it's you get different things from different recordings like that maybe isn't like I wouldn't call most of the big bands that you're talking about like really like big bands that are we discuss in like an entity like who played in this band over the last 40 years or something like that. Like that doesn't really make sense in the context of what you're talking about.
Right.
But like another kind of one that I really like that's kind of in between is thinking about like Maria Schneider's band, and it's just like that's definitely like that is a big band or a jazz ensemble, but it's not like there are only so many albums that she has, which is a lot for a big band these days for sure. But it's like those are like every track on those albums is just like it's like not just music, but it's art.
Yep. Profoundly so.
Yeah, it's definitely like that. That stuff is like transcendent. It's like you don't have to like big band, you don't have to like jazz, you just have to like music, and I feel like you'll like it.
I don't even know if you necessarily have to like music.
That's
I feel
fair.
like if we needed to convert somebody,
right,
it was just like, yeah, I don't listen. I get that sometimes from students. They're just like, yeah, I don't really listen to music a lot. Like general ed music students. They're just like, yeah, I'm like, what do you listen to at home? They're like, oh, we don't listen to anything.
Yeah.
What do you like? Like, I don't like anything.
It's like you just only listen. You're just like you're 8 and you only listen to podcasts at home.
Right. Yes, that's it.
Just like just like it's all NPR for me.
It's actually all low brass U. Them.
They refuse to watch any of the videos on the channel where there's music being played. They only listen. They actually only prefer to listen to music being talked about.
You'd be surprised, Zach. You'd be surprised.
There's a whole cult following of low brass U talk enthusiasts, but not actual music enthusiasts.
The tuba playing, I can take it or leave it.
Yeah,
but, I mean the talk. One more thing before we get off of this. I will say one like true big band thing. My heart will always belonged to Count Basie Orchestra. That was like what got me into music initially. So it's like I really owe him to that. And my favorite all-time album is Breakfast, Dance, and Barbecue. Top number one, like Desert Island record of like any recorded sound. That would definitely be in the discussion, like if I had to bring one.
And, I was going to go over to another comment, but also, thinking about, this is a low brass channel. Trombone is the predominant low brass instrument in big bands. I feel like we would be doing a slight disservice without talking about the Stan Kenton Orchestra and talking about Dick Shearer and how his influence and just like the trombone forward, or really brass forward, but, in our little ecosystem,
Yeah.
trombone forward, where trombone gets its own moments. Because there are like years of Count Basie stuff where trombones only play with the trumpets, basically. Like that's
Right.
they're hard. It's like you play 5th through 8th trumpet.
Right.
That's kind of all you get to do. But I definitely, as selfishly as a trombone player, I really enjoy playing. I mean, obviously, it's like we have to play all together, but I like having moments where the trombones are their own entity, and they get to do their own thing.
100% agree. I think my grandpa gave me a copy of Live at Redlands University when I was like 8, and I lost it. But I have the CD, and then I got like really hip to that record like in college and came home. I was like, I know I have this somewhere, and I opened it empty. Whatever. But
Yeah.
That was one of the CDs like that got me really on fire about big band when I was an undergrad. So I would say if you're a trombone or a low brass musician and you want to just light the fire and get pumped about big band, check out Live at Redlands University. Start with Little Minor Blues, go
Right.
on to Tico Tico. It's all good.
Yeah, I mean,
Just
if
check it
you're a
out.
trombone player, it's like you have to start Little Minor Blues on that album. It's just
Yeah.
like,
That's Tuba Mirum for big band trombone.
there you go.
excerpts.
Just like that moment in the lead trombone where it goes from high B flat to high D flat. It's just like, what's better than this? It's just that's the good moment in that. So we got a couple of comments. Put these together here from Harrison. I've got a solo and ensemble performance in 2.5 weeks with my bass trombone solo. Has a very fast and wonky fourth movement I haven't worked up. Any tips? And then Harrison later followed up and said, besides working it up slowly with a metronome. I mean, you're gonna hate what I have to say, but a lot of it is slowly with the metronome. It's so important to do slow practice with a metronome. I taught a couple lessons today, and one of my college students, it's like we were looking at this like 16th run, and it's like he could play it, but it wasn't clean enough for me, and I was just like, well, what are we gonna do? It's like we're gonna practice it slowly, and it's just take those 5 notes that it was. Da 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 da, just slowly over and over and over again. But besides practicing it slowly with metronome, thinking about maybe playing with a piano. That's something that I'll often do, especially if you're saying very fast and wonky. I assume that maybe that wonky is coming from some interesting melodies or intervals that maybe you're not as comfortable with. Is kind of what I would assume you're kind of implying from that. Which in that sort of regard, sitting there at the piano, or if you don't have a piano or a keyboard or something, I mean, you can load one up in a web browser and click with your mouse, or on a phone like a tuner app or something. Sing it, buzz it, play it, all of those sorts of things. But I really believe in slow practice. I tend to tell my students to practice slowly for months. So you got 2.5 weeks. You got a whole week of practicing just slowly on those faster, tricky sections, I think. Do you have any other thoughts, Connor?
I got some tips. I would say my first tip is really specific. So if we need a product in 2.5 weeks, one thing that might help is to take the parts that are wonky and go to there could be other places you could do this. My advice would be go to tunetranscriber.com. It's free. That's why I suggest tunetranscriber.com.
Not sponsored.
What you'll do, not sponsored. Record yourself on a device and throw it up on tunetranscriber.com and play it. When you record yourself, play it at half speed. And then when you go to tunetranscriber.com, there's a function where you can change the speed of the song. Go ahead and increase it 100%. So that it doubles the speed of what you're listening to. Then you will have a version of you played it at half speed, but now we're going to hear those notes at tempo, played hopefully in time, in tone, in tune, with good style, and you can listen to what that perfect version of it sounds like. That might help, unless there's a good, clear recording where this wonky part, you can like isolate it and listen to it. That would be a good way to get the sound of the lick in your ear.
Yeah, listening is definitely going to help. I mean, that's something, especially with a lot of my students, like high school age. It's like, are you listening to this piece? If not, if you're crushing it and you haven't listened to it, I don't have a huge problem with that necessarily, but if you're struggling with it, that's that's one of the quicker ways to get it that maybe doesn't take active practice. But yeah, I think that what Connor said is definitely helpful. And one other tip that I'll say that I got from one of my good friends, Mike Frazier, who you may know on certain platforms as Smooth Tuba Tuesday, or maybe that's not what he's called,
Yeah.
but he has the Smooth Tuba Tuesday. But he's a tuba player and also a pianist, and I remember I'm trying to remember what piece I was playing, but it was while I was in grad school, because he was also in grad school at the same time at Northwestern, and he told I was having trouble with this one passage, and he told me to kind of like, I think it was like a sextuplet thing that like just like went up and down, and like it was all slurred, and that's not necessarily the friendliest thing on a brass instrument. And he told me to just sit at the piano and just kind of roll the chord, roll it back down, roll it back, just slowly kind of back and forth, and kind of stretch out your ear, so to speak, that way. And that's a trick that I've used that's been pretty helpful for me over the years.
I like that. I'll have to try that out sometime.
Yeah, I think it's pretty helpful. So let's see. Favorite trombonist on either tenor or bass? So pretty open-ended. I feel like we've talked enough about, the umbrella of jazz trombonists earlier in this stream. So maybe we should go specifically to non-jazz trombonists.
Sure.
Not saying the jazz trombones aren't valid. It's just, we'd be saying
That's
a
fine.
lot of the same names that we already said earlier. That is my only reasoning. But yeah, do you wanna go first on this one?
I can. Let me think. Favorite trombonist.
If you wanna pick one instrument, I'll do the other.
Tell you what, I'll go tenor, and it's one that is new to me.
Ooh.
That is a favorite. That is what's Steiner. He has he's recently put out some records. Peter Steiner.
He's been doing a lot of stuff on YouTube also.
Yeah, he did. I first heard him on his album with the Castor Red Sonatine on it, and it just absolutely blew my socks off. And I've been a fan ever since. I've checked out all this stuff, follow him on social media and all that, and he's just slugging away. He's just a true musician of the craft. He's a great trombone soloist. I think that's like his big thing right now.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean he's like a young virtuoso. I mean he's old enough now where he's not like a young virtuoso, but he's still young. He's a little younger than we are, I think. But yeah, he's amazing. Certainly. Favorite bass trombonist. It's hard to go just one. But if I had to go just one singular favorite bass trombonist, I feel like it's hard to not have James Markey in there. And someone
hard pressed.
Someone just said Brian Hecht, and it's just like, yes, I mean that's Brian Hecht is also like his sound. There's a small, it's like a short clip of him, Brian Hecht playing the John Williams tuba concerto. It's just like not with pianists, just like it's just him working on it on YouTube. And it's just like this. It's just like some of the harder spots in the first movement. It's just like, man, when I play this on tuba with valves, it's not this clean. Like, I don't know. It's I can handle myself on bass trombone decently well, I think, most of the time. But then it's like I hear someone like that play, and it's just like, all right, so should I just sell it and just cut my losses? But yeah, he's amazing. There are plenty of others. We definitely could make a long list. There are plenty of other people. So let's see. Airsoft Mickey says, there we go. Tenor, bass, or alto. So I'm not sure if we're talking on clefs, trombones, vocal ranges, recorders. What else could we throw that way?
Ukuleles, guitars.
Yeah. But yeah, so we'll assume that you're talking about trombones here with this one. And I mean, both of us are predominantly tenor trombonists, I would say, of those three. That's where the money is in most of the, you can make money playing those other instruments. I rarely make.
Is that a metric of your enjoyment?
No.
Okay.
It's not a metric of my enjoyment, but it's a metric of
Like, what is your favorite?
I'm just a realist of, it's
Okay.
I
All
I
right.
have to put money in my bank account so that I can live indoors and eat food. That's,
Okay. So
that
that's a quality that you look for in a like an instrument inside of a family of instruments is like, does it bring home the bacon or not? That is a
right.
quality that you can observe and improve.
And we'll maybe segue to this a little bit later because this is one of my predetermined topics that we might get into. But for tenor trombone, that's where I make most of my money, even more than tuba, despite how many tuba degrees I may have. But tenor trombone is what makes the most money for me. Bass trombone occasionally does make money, and if you would have asked me 24 hours ago, I would have said that I haven't made money on bass trombone in a significant amount of time. But that changed yesterday with a remote recording session that I did, which we might talk about a little bit later. And then alto trombone. My last alto trombone gig was 2016 or 2017. But as far Airsoft Mickey is saying now what you like to play. But I also I don't want to speak for Connor, but I feel like if you're talking about what you like to play, to me that comes down to what are you most easily able to express yourself with. And at least for me, of those three, tenor trombone is much simpler for me to get my ideas out.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's, whatever one you've spent the most time with is going to have the biggest connection, or if we're going to use like fancy science terms, the myelination of, your brain.
Did you go to college? Is that what you're trying to show off to everyone?
So there you have it. I would say, tenor trombone is definitely the one of like, I can hear a sound, it comes out relatively closer.
It doesn't come out always for me, and probably not for you either, but more often, I think about the times that I improvise on bass trombone, and not always, but there's just like an inevitable moment where it's just like, oh, yep, this isn't tenor trombone. Calm down,
I think part of my preference for tenor trombone probably has come now through experiences and opportunities that it's opened up for me, as far as like playing with musicians that I really admire or being in a musical community. Like, I feel like I can bring my best self and serve the music on the one that I am most skilled at.
Right.
And I think that it's kind of like, maybe that's not why I enjoy it, but then I get into the moment of playing it and I do very much enjoy that. Whereas if I'm playing bass trombone or alto trombone, I'm probably thinking a lot more about, it might be imposter syndrome, but it's probably a lot of it is like, in the moment, especially if you're reading something for the first time, it's like you're thinking about the mechanics of the instrument, and that might be getting in the way of whatever flow or creative process I might have.
And
so that's a me problem.
Imposter syndrome comes up a lot, I feel like, in musicians. And what is sometimes not said is that imposter syndrome, it's like sometimes you are an imposter. Sometimes that is real. And I know when I played that one alto trombone gig that I had, we played a Mendelssohn symphony, and I thought about bringing a tenor trombone to as a safety net. I didn't. But man, did I bring almost every mouthpiece I had. Especially at that time, it's like I didn't know what my alto trombone mouthpiece was, and it's just like whatever makes the sound right now is the mouthpiece. And I had probably 5 mouthpieces, which that's not. I almost always have 2 mouthpieces on me, but 5 is that's not how I tend to live my life. Like, what am I, a trumpet player? That's definitely not how I normally do things. I ended up only using 2, I think, but yeah, so I would love to be just like the world's greatest alto trombonist, but it's just probably never going to happen. I do want to, continue my bass trombone journey. But that's, it's worked for me so far, but there definitely is more that I can do with it for sure. Not to say that I've mastered tenor trombone or tuba or anything like that, but,
Sure.
So let's see. Ian says, could you swing Fountains of Rome? I'm going to turn that around and say, should you? Should you swing Fountains of Rome?
Yes, you should.
And then it begs the question, are we swinging 16ths? Are we swinging eighth notes? Because generally you're only swinging one of those two things. And so you probably are thinking about swinging it's like the eighth notes are slow enough where you could swing them. The 16ths are probably a little bit too fast to swing, where the swing becomes straight enough anyway. That's probably not the point of that question. But let's see. So
I think that was the point of the
that
question.
was the point of the question.
We need to get into the theory of this.
Right. So let's see. We've got Harrison says, do you guys ever write your own music? Any reasons why you do or don't? I can answer that for both of us probably, that we both do write our own music. We probably... I know I don't do it as much as I would like to do. And there's little evidence in the world other than in my own little office that there are these writings. But yes, maybe Connor, you can talk since you have a little bit more evidence and you're actively kind of working a little bit more.
Yeah, recently I would say that I am writing a lot more music, and that was a goal that I had. I think that everyone should, to kind of answer your second part, any reason you do or don't. I think that your technical playing is going to get better. Your listening as an ensemble member is going to get better. Your creative improvising is going to get better. I think that like composition or arranging or any type of like just composing that you can do is like the ultimate critical thinking question that could be in the world of like your musical learning. Like that's just like, that takes all of the things that you know about music and makes it really, really high level learning in the same way that improvisation does. I think they're, definitely closely related. And so, yeah, I write a lot of music, and I'm at a point now where I'm really, really excited that like projects might actually be happening, and some
It might come to fruition.
Yeah, and I think that is happening now because of very small, imperceptible changes in my daily life that I made 1.5 to 2 years ago, where I was like, okay, I want to be playing my original music. What does someone who plays their original music do with their time? And back then it was just like, write something every day. It can be like absolutely 4 measures. It could be a blob. It could be literally try to write something bad. There was Anna Jalkus, is a Swedish harp player and vocalist, who said this really, really cool thing one time. I can't remember if she was like speaking or teaching, or she might have just been saying it. We were classmates at UNT. She taught there for a while. She's in Boston now. But she said that when you're writing music, you have to, her expression was, let the water run brown, like as if you were turning on a faucet. You just turned on the main water line for the first time in your house, and just let whatever's in there just needs to come out. So, it's like having some time set away for writing. That could also just be like total stream of consciousness. And that's what I do. I write stuff on GarageBand, and I just write nonsense, just non-tonal clusters of major seconds and noise. And then eventually, like, no matter what it is, it always ends up shaping itself into something that really sounds like what's going on in your head, even if you didn't know that was going on in your head. So yeah, I would say everybody should write.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an important thing. I've kind of always just been the type that says that, like, I'm going to do it once, like, I'm not in school anymore. But I seem to always be in school. Although hopefully that'll be done this year.
That's right.
So we'll see.
It's a good question.
Yeah. Ian, I think talking about the fountain, I think Ian was the person who said the fountains of Rome. Yeah, swing the swing.
Swing the swing.
Yeah, I suppose. So Brian, again, crushing it with these great, somewhat open-ended questions. Favorite albums? So, favorite albums. I think I'm going to have to go probably Marshall Gilk's Sound Stories. I know I've already referenced it once today, but that...
Fanboying out.
I mean, it's just...
That's all right. No, it's killing.
Before that, I would have said... what's Edendary? That was like the one for me until, like, I had his 2 albums at that time, and then I remember, it's like, I want to say it was like the fall of like freshman year of college or something when Sound Stories came out, and it was just like, I don't know. I just remember like hearing the murmurings that it like came out and just like immediately like downloading it on iTunes, on iTunes or something, and just like had to have it that second.
Yeah.
I think I also have a physical copy of that one. I think.
Things changed when that album came out.
Right. Especially just like Donny McCaslin being on that album, like having like just like a super hot fire, side man for that. Just like, I don't know how much that cost to get Donny McCaslin on the record, but like worth every penny and then some. That definitely was and it was like not just like, obviously Donny McCaslin's great, but for that album to me, he was like absolutely the right call. Like you could call, like there are other good tenor saxophone players, but like the way that he plays, his ideas just like fit so well into that album, even though it's like not exactly what most of his more recent albums are. It's like, most of his newer stuff is far more electronic, with like Tim LaFave and stuff like that. But yeah, it's just like hearing him play like all acoustic, creative art music was pretty cool. So I'll let you go, Connor.
Yeah, just such a killing record. It's tough to say. If we're talking about,
You're talking about any album that you want.
it's hard because if I go outside of like jazz and classical music, my favorite album is 4 albums. It's the first 4 Weezer albums. It's Green, Blue, Pinkerton, Maladroit. Listened all the way through, just like that. I've got a playlist of all of it that, like, on road trips, if I'm bored, that's still like a go-to for me. But beyond that, I would say Oscar Peterson's collection of Exclusively for My Friends. They're all like kind of like EP sized, like maybe 6 tracks each. I don't know how many of them there are exactly, but they're just the sickest recordings of Oscar Peterson. They're done by a personal friend of his who was a sound audio engineer, kind of expert dude in Germany. And so when Oscar Peterson would tour with his trio, which was a lot of the times Ed Thigpen, Ray Brown, and other various amalgamations, they would hang for like a couple of weeks at this guy's house because he had a full studio in his basement, and they would just have people over and it'd be like a party, and they'd go downstairs and they would play a set for the people, like while they were hanging that time, like touring through Europe. And so it's not the stuff, it's like not part of Jazz at the Philharmonic. It's not part of any Verve collection. It's not owned by any record company. There was no producer that had an agenda on it. And so it's just them like stretching absolutely out on tunes that they felt like playing as opposed to like what they had to like promote.
Which like if people don't know is like really not how most of the industry works.
Right.
It's like all the, like the Blue Note things, and like especially thinking about like the story that sticks out in my head is like when Miles Davis was switching labels, just like let's just make as many albums as possible and just like get this over with, So yeah, that's definitely a fun thing to get to hear when it's just let's do what we want. So we're probably about a little over halfway of how long we're going to stream tonight. So we'll go ahead and hit the sponsored plug of the Low Brass U store, where you can now purchase fine T-shirts and other various accessories.
Oh,
pause for hydration.
Hydration station.
And even an accessories pouch, which literally I got out of the mailbox today, right before the stream. So if you're interested, go ahead and check those out. Pretty excited about those. I apparently was too excited last week, so I'll contain my excitement.
Why don't you keep a lid on it?
Apparently not allowed to have emotions. But anyway, so Airsoft Mickey is asking, how do you bully the second trombonist? And I think you're asking the wrong question.
You're asking the wrong trombonists. So where are the second trombonists?
I think the better question is, how do you bully the principal trombonist or the first trombonist? And that's just, push your tuning slide all the way in.
Right. But that's the meanest thing you could do.
But also don't do that.
Kill him with sharpness.
Yeah, kill him with sharpness. That's definitely one thing that you can do that you should never do. And I don't think that I've ever done that. But it's definitely not how you make friends. So
No.
in general, because that, it's just not a kind thing to do. But you shouldn't bully anyone, that first of all.
But if you were going to, I have a suggestion.
Yeah.
Let's say, I don't know what band you're sitting in. This could be a big band. This could be concert band, orchestra. It works everywhere. So you got a multi-measure rest. You're all counting it. When you get to measure 4, just like hit him with a 5, like pretend like you're counting.
And be
And then
off
that'll
by...
put your second trombonist. He'll be up ahead, and then he'll bark out. He'll come in a measure early.
Yeah.
Or he or she, I should say. Sorry. Yeah. So they will come in a measure early.
Maybe. Not if they're smart. But yes,
They might.
that would be an unkind thing to do.
I think if I was sitting in an ensemble and I looked at the first trombonist and they threw a 5, I'd be like, oh, wow, I miscounted. I'm pretty trusting of other people's fingers.
Yeah, I'm more skeptical of the world, I think.
Yes, that's where we differ.
I assume everyone's lying to me, and then, then they prove that they're not lying to me. So...
South Coast Youth Symphony Orchestra, he says.
Yes.
Okay, so Youth Symphony Orchestra. Let's see, what could you do to bully the second trombonist?
I think let's keep it with some friendly bullying things. I think that
I think it's playful bullying.
yeah,
Yeah.
I would say you can always do the especially playing trombone in an orchestra. You're inevitably sitting there for a movement that you don't play. And especially in a youth orchestra, not saying that not everyone is super prepared, but you might have a second trombonist who didn't listen to the second movement that you don't play on insert every symphony ever. And, in that moment, you're just playing along this nice, slow movement, and you just get your horn ready to play, and you take a breath and just, really freak them out.
Mm-hmm.
That's always
a good one.
That's always a way to do it. So... let's see. How do we feel about contrabass bugles? I have no ill will on contrabass bugles, but all marching low brass instruments that are that large do not do good things for your body, and that's how I feel about them, I guess. So I guess I do have negative feelings.
I just learned about contrabass bugles just now. I didn't know what a contrabass bugle was.
You hear them referred to as contras. You probably heard that before.
Yeah. That's the big fella with the...
Right, like the over the
Where
shoulder.
do they put the valves on that thing?
There's some in there. It's usually not a full complement of valves, but yeah, there's some in there. And then there's some that are convertible to being concert tubas, as it were. You don't see too many of those.
That makes sense for if a program really, really wants to have marching instruments and concert band,
those marching instruments are
the way to do it.
expensive. I
see.
Just looking at how expensive sousaphones are, and so much of those prices to me, as the pessimist, are dictated a lot by just schools just paying. It's tax dollars, so they have the money. Some schools have the money to, let's say, buy $8,000 sousaphones. I don't want to spend $8,000 on a sousaphone. That's why I don't have one. But you don't have to spend that much. But that's the going rate for a lot of them. So yeah, those convertible ones have that perk. Let's see here.
That makes no sense.
Let's see. All of we don't need these comments.
This is all for pestering this poor
Right.
second trombonist. If you do any of these things that we've suggested, which we're not suggesting you do,
Right.
you should definitely
for
take
legal
this person out for dinner or lunch after rehearsal.
for legal
Do
reason.
something nice
This
for them.
is a joke.
Yes. Everything we say on this podcast is satire.
Nothing is real. These shirts don't even exist. They're just a figment of your imagination. It's actually just I put the logo on top of the shirts, and it tracks where we are. That's how it works. But yeah, so maybe since the question seem to have died down for a bit, maybe we'll talk about kind of in a vacuum. We'll talk about this topic, but also as it pertains to what I did last night for someone being just remote recording sessions, and maybe to some extent recording sessions in general. So I was kind of thinking we could talk about like the whole process of something like this, since it was just like so fresh in my mind, and also, you know, I mean, obviously you've done these things many times as well, but it's like it happened to me less than 24 hours ago that I got, you know, an Instagram message from a friend asking, you know, can I record something for them? And of course, the answer is sure. I would love to. You want to pay me money to sit at my home and play brass instruments? Those are all the things that I like. Staying at home being top priority, playing a brass instrument, and then money. You know, basically in that order. So I was able to get that recording session, you know, remote recording session, and you know, basically how that worked in this instance. And I would say this is mostly how this stuff works that I've done, but it, you know, it doesn't necessarily always go exactly this way. That I got both a PDF of music, and I got a recording, and I was asked if I wanted stems, so individual tracks of each instrument or you know, take or whatever, or if I wanted just the bounce or the, you know, the main track all together. And so having that as being individual things was really nice, because I had kind of the main track with, you know, drums, bass, and all this other stuff, and then I had all the horns individual, so I could, you know, go back to, you know, if I was playing with the alto saxophones for this one line or something like that. So I guess what is your process? I'm sure it changes to, you know, depending on what you end up getting, because it's kind of an open-ended thing. You could get a track and it's you know, an orchestral thing that you're doing, or you could get a track and it's a country song. You know, I didn't know what I was getting. You know, I had some idea that it was like a funk track, but that's about all I got. So what's your process? Let's say I just gave you a track and a PDF. What are you going to do?
Okay, so I would say if it's my track, or if you're sending me a track and I am the musician who is recording, I mean, you just have to make it work with whatever they've got, and all you can do is work with the information you've been given. But as long as I have a chart, we can get through it. If I have a track, goody. If I have stems, whoopee. That's
right.
Like we're spoiled, absolutely rotten. So I would say that's fantastic. I mean, most of the stuff that I've done recently, I've been sent like a click and then like a MIDI mock-up that's just all the stems as one track, which is fine. That's A-okay. So, I mean, what I would do is just set up my recording stuff like I always would, with my EQ and compression, everything where I like it, you know, I mean,
and
not super.
That's a good point to talk about too, is just, you know, processing the sound. Do you do any of it? Do you do all of it? In this case, knowing who I was sending it to, I kind of assumed they wouldn't want anything on it. And
Correct.
So I left it completely dried, and, you know, I didn't cover up any articulation noise by some compression or something like that.
Right.
You know, because I figured they would want to do that, but sometimes they don't want to do that. But it's, you know.
Well, I think like most of the time for me, like I like having my presets there just because like I know that's like, for me when I'm recording in and listening back, I like it just because it's not super heavy anyways. It's because most of like my presets are for like audition tapes where they don't want something adorned, like you're playing in you know, a giant hall or anything like that. So I keep it in there, and then I just duck it, and then I say to them like, hey, do you want this? Like, do you want me to do this on my end or on yours? Like, what do you want?
And to be fair, I've worked with this person multiple times.
You know them.
So that
yes.
was, you know, this wasn't just a random, hey, like, I saw you on the internet, can you record for me? It was, hey, you've, like, not only been the person playing, you've also been the person recording. Like, we have a rapport, and I obviously, you never know exactly all the things that they might want, but, you know, having a rapport. This is someone that I went to school with. You know, you went to school with also. So it wasn't just like a blind, like, I'm not sure what to do. It was, you know, it wasn't our first rodeo together.
And I would say, like, if you the thing that you want to do is get them the product, do it well, and get it back to them in a timely fashion. So if you're doing a recording project at home, especially if it's not being filmed. Like sometimes it's a different discussion if you're doing like a virtual ensemble where they want to see you.
Yeah,
But if there's no video involved, don't be afraid to splice it. I mean, what are they gonna do? Like take you to music jail? Like if there's an 8-bar multi-measure rest, don't sit there tapping your foot.
right.
Just punch it in. Take a break. That means you get more than one try at that spot. You can do letter A as many times as you want before you go on to letter B.
Right. I mean,
enough daylight.
the world of recording, in that sort of sense is it's a glamour recording sort of situation. It's you're definitely not. It's not like how do you play. It's get me the best possible recording that you can.
Right.
So we all like to think like, oh no, I'm going to get it in one take and I want it to be real or something like that. In this case, that is essentially a pointless endeavor. The only thing that matters is, I knew the price that I was making up front, so if I spend a really long time on it, my pay per hour goes down, so I don't necessarily want that. But as far as, everything else goes, there's no reason for me to try to do it all in one take. My personal process sometimes is going through in one take, especially because I use Pro Tools and I have playlist recording on, so I can. What I tend to do, if it's easy enough, if it's really hard, I'll very much go individual, line or something like that, because that's ultimately I want it to be the fastest. There's no one looking over my shoulder. The idea is two things. You want it to be done with the utmost quality, and you want it to be done with the minimum amount of time for you to get the utmost quality. And obviously, you can always go down the rabbit hole of spending more and more time with minimal reward. But there's definitely an element of it has to be good, or otherwise you're not going to get called back again. That's not what we want. But we also, when you have a fixed rate, you don't want to sit here and spend 24 hours, 10 work hours on it, and then you realize that you're not even making minimum wage or something for it. That's definitely not the point. If that's where your playing is and you hope to get more of these sorts of things, I get it. But for the most part, it's only going to get so much better in a small window of time. Especially I was dealing with someone who's halfway across the globe, and so I knew they sent it to me at like 8 p.m. last night, and it's like I know that they're just getting up for the day probably, with being like 11 hours ahead. They're just starting to start their real work day, and I wanted to get it done before they were done for the day, and especially I wanted to have it where we could have some back and forth while I know that they should be awake and kind of active. So I stayed up really late last night. I stayed up till 4 a.m. I didn't because I wanted to wait till I wanted to wait till I finished it before then, but I couldn't go to sleep because I had too much coffee. But the point of all that, none of that really matters for what we're talking about right now. But making the two most important things are the most important thing is playing well, sending a really good thing, but you don't want it to take necessarily forever to get that high quality recording. So what I had to do last night was 2 parts, 1 bass trombone and 1 tenor trombone, and the tenor trombone was pretty normal. Bass trombone stuff was on the lower side and definitely exposed the not quite enough fundamentals that I've been doing in the double valve range as of late. I definitely there are 2 sections that I probably had 5 or 6 takes that I just did, and then I spliced exactly which 4 notes that I wanted to have from this recording, and that's that sounds really silly because most of them were good. If it was a live performance, all of those except for maybe one, all of those would be pretty much fine. But since it's a recording, my name's going on all these sorts of things, I got to make sure that, it's a solid recording. So yeah, it's definitely an interesting thing, and yeah, I think that it's important to know that when you're doing a remote recording for yourself, take as many takes as you need to, and splice together. Obviously it can't sound bad, but especially for horn players, you're often in the background. So if there's a rest, you're probably okay to splice. And I think that that's an important skill. I think that to a lot of like classical musicians, that would seem like a really bad, as a generality. I know that there's a lot of different people in there, but if you're thinking about it from like a performing musician aspect, I guess is probably even a better way to put it. It seems bad to have 4 notes from one take and 4 notes from another take. But what if that one note is 10 cents sharp, or it's like you didn't get the world's greatest articulation on one note. You want to make sure that you send essentially like the best version of yourself for those sorts of things. So yeah, I think that it's an important skill, and you can practice that skill before you get asked to do it too. You can be recording yourself and listening back, and you don't need fancy microphones or fancy audio editing software to do it necessarily. You can do it with probably all things that you already have. A cell phone microphone, especially if you're just practicing. If you put a cell phone microphone in the right place, it can do a pretty good job.
Absolutely.
That's not what I used on this recording session, but for practicing, that's not a bad way of going about it. And you could edit in Audacity, or if you have a Mac, you could do it in GarageBand, or things that come with your computer, to try to like work on those sorts of skills. Because I think that they are skills, and knowing those programs. One of the reasons why I got that call is probably because it's known that I know how to use that program, and I'm known to have decent microphones, and obviously the playing too. But in today's day and age, believe it or not, I'm not the only good player out there. There are plenty of other good players. There are people better than me on every single instrument that I play. But being in the right person that the person knows and all those sorts of things definitely helps. Do you have any closing thoughts before we get into some of these other comments about remote recording or just recording in general?
No, I think you really hit it and explained it well. I will say we're talking about home recording right now. Most of these general guidelines are kind of the opposite for if you're recording in a studio, where the main objective, of course, is to get the product, but you're paying for the time.
Right.
And so the way to make that recording the most efficient and to not waste other people's time that might be in that booth with you is to get it right the first time. So have your reading eyes and your reading ears on, and take an ear out so that you can hear the room, because the intonation that you hear in your headphones is going to be slightly different than what you hear inside of the room, just because sound's bouncing in different ways, and you need to reconcile those two worlds.
Right. I tend to record with one, for these things, I use in-ear monitors because they're a little bit, more streamlined and they look a little bit better. But I always use over-ear, and I only have one cup of, one earphone on. And ideally, if I weren't so cheap, I would buy a headset that specifically was just one earphone. And then they do make those, and I'll probably get one eventually, but it's just, I can also just only put one on my head. So I tend to not need that. But yeah, so one, and for trombone, I make sure that it's my right ear so that I can hear, my ear closer to the bell is open. And for tuba, it is mostly the same, because the bell, at least on front action tubas, the bell's going to go, on my left side as well. But sometimes it's not the case. I maybe need to really listen closely to someone else. There are lots of different factors that kind of go along with that. But yeah, I think it's maybe we could, before we get to these other comments, we could talk a little bit about the difference of doing it in person in a recording studio, because the most important thing in a recording studio is not wasting time. So a lot of chit chat, a lot of doing things off task, those sorts of things that literally cost someone money in most cases. And you're not just paid because you're a good player. You're getting paid because the hope is that you would take less time than someone else to get that recording done. So, especially, thinking about this recording last night, I almost used 3 trombones, and if I were in person, I would have used 3. But I kind of liked the sound, because there was some low stuff on the tenor trombone part, and I was playing it without a valve. if I was in a real studio, I wouldn't have even thought about playing that on a small tenor trombone. If we were doing one take of that whole thing, I would go to a large tenor and have access to the valve to, because it was in E, so there were lots of B's and things. So that's definitely a thing to think about. And for me personally, I always bring more instruments to a recording studio than I need. That's just kind of my default. But some of that is just, how I live my life. But also, you want to make sure that you have, at any moment someone might say, hey, can you take that up an octave? Hey, can you take that down an octave? Hey, can you hear that guitar part? Hey, you hear this trumpet line. Can you play that also? And, oh, hey, we're going to actually, let's do this up a half step now. We're going to shift everything up. Because that's what works for, it's not something that usually happens in a studio session. But, anything is possible, and you want to be prepared for whatever. I've even been in situations where it's like we were doing this one track, and then all of a sudden, hey, we're going to do another one. So it's like, and I didn't hear it beforehand or whatever. So for me, I always bring an extra trombone or two, or I bring another instrument that I didn't need. Like recently I had a euphonium recording session, and I was told it was a euphonium recording session, and the person who contracted me was a saxophone player, and who I worked with a couple of times, but I don't know super well. And I just kind of assume, that people don't really know what the difference between a euphonium and a tuba is. So I brought a tuba as well, because what I didn't want is to have to play something really low that sounds bad and is hard on the euphonium when I could just play it on tuba, and that would sound better and be easier, and we would waste less time, all of those sorts of things. So I brought a tuba. Did I use the tuba? No, but I had it. And it made me, it's a safety net. I feel better. I also had a euphonium mute with me. I really didn't think I would need a euphonium mute, and I didn't need it. It didn't leave the trunk of my car. But I have one, and you never know what you might kind of get into. So I think I had a tuba mute also with me, which again, like I wasn't even told to play tuba. I don't need a tuba mute. But those are the sorts of things that I kind of think about when I go into a recording session is having a lot of extra things that I might need. Someone might say, hey, can we try a mute with that? Those are the sorts of things that can happen. And you're not always working with someone who knows your instrument well. They may be a musician. They may not even be that great of a musician. Sometimes you're not speaking the same language, which is why remote recording sessions at home are great, because almost within arm's length I can touch every brass instrument I own. So
it's true.
That's very nice. And so I didn't have to think about what I might need. But yeah, I remember a recording session I did about 2 years ago now. I knew I was multi-tracking a bunch of trombone things, and I think they wanted me to double track something, so they wanted me to have different trombones to play the same part over, which kind of solves some phase issues, which we don't really need to talk about, but there are reasons to do that, certainly. And I think I brought 6 trombones and used 4, maybe 5. Wow. So, was that the only way to do it? Probably not, but it was what they wanted, and again, one of the reasons why I was asked to do it. So,
there you go.
But yeah, let's get into these things. So let's see. Mr. Anonymous says hello. Good to see you. We'll get to your question. We try to get to the questions in the order presented. So Ivan says, I'm a sophomore in high school and play tuba, and I'm going to join the jazz band next year, and I'm going to learn how to play bass trombone. Do you have any tips for learning how to play trombone?
Do it. Play trombone.
Yeah.
Do it. That's great.
I mean, that was my exact, way of doing things. I started playing trombone because I wanted to play in jazz band. I was playing tuba in band for years, and I played drum set in jazz band in middle school, and then in high school I knew that I wasn't good enough to do that. So I knew that wasn't an option, and they needed trombone players, and so I played bass trombone. And I think the best advice that I can give someone who's switching or adding that instrument is play things that you already know, things that don't go super low, but things like a Bordoni or something like that, and playing it in the tuba range. That's a good way to kind of get things together. And assuming you have some proficiency on tuba and some musical understanding, the issue is converting that to trombone land. It's not that you're learning trombone as a first instrument. It's like you're getting what's already up here to this kind of new realm. So I don't know if you have any comments, especially Connor, like you kind of added valve instruments. I mean, it's the opposite direction, but maybe you have some feedback that's related to that.
Yeah, I would say that's probably the best advice, is start with what you know, because you've already done the extraordinary mental feat of learning a musical instrument. In some capacity, you are already playing the tuba, and that's not easy to do. So take all of that work that you've done and make it work for you again, and go through, if you're a sophomore in high school, play the songs that you played. If you still got your music from freshman year, I know I stole all my music parts all the time. So go back and play old concerts or old shows that figure it out on the trombone. That's a fun way to do it. You've probably got some scales or warm-ups or something that you do on the tuba, or something that your teacher might make you do. I would take those, maybe for now, pencil in some slide positions and see if you can't make a trombone version of those warm-ups. That might be a good way to get you moving around the horn, because you'd be able to hear that in your head. You've got the tuba version playing in your brain, and now you're creating the bass trombone version. So yeah, I think that's great. And yeah, let us know how it goes. Jazz band is so much fun. You're going to love it. And bass trombone is double the fun. I can't speak as someone who doesn't play tuba. I don't know how fun playing the tuba is.
Depends.
But, just smacking the low notes on a bass trombone, that's it. That's what we're talking. That's why we're here.
Yeah.
You're going to love it.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, Ivan says that he has an idea of the slide positions and how they relate to valve fingerings. Good. Yeah, it's easy to talk about it. We have to get it to be kind of second nature and not really think about, okay, so 2 and 3, that's 5th position. Because there also are some differences, too, that are maybe slightly less relevant on bass trombone, but on every valve instrument we think about, high G being 1 and 2. And not no trombonist, but it's rare for a trombonist to play that not in sharp second. We don't play that G in 4th position, which would be the conversion that would happen.
You could if you wanted.
You could if you wanted to, but how many times do you do that, Connor? We don't play that note there because it's not the most efficient way to do it, because we play a tuning slide. Right. So, I think the biggest thing for me, too, is just whenever I've learned a new instrument or worked on a new low brass instrument, I've just gone straight to my friends or whoever. I would just bother whoever I could find. If you're better than me at something on a low brass instrument, I'm going to bother you. That's, some of Connor and I's early relationship. It's like, we would play tunes and it's just like, oh, I don't know that tune. Teach me that tune. That was a lot of how kind of things, would go. And it's like, oh, I haven't really heard that sort of sound. What is that sound? What are you thinking over that? That same thing with bass trombone, same thing with euphonium. I've been fortunate to always be around good players on the instruments that including the instruments that were my main instruments, but also the ones that I was kind of learning at the time. And to me, kind of segueing into how is, our college experience, which is definitely a long-winded question that we'll have to cut short. But yeah, so thinking, one of the great things about going to the University of North Texas, in my opinion, for me, especially as an undergrad, was maybe even if you are the best player of one thing, there's something that someone else does better than you. Maybe it's they play chamber music better than you. Maybe it's they play lead trombone better than you. Maybe they improvise better than you. Maybe they play, bass drum better than you. It's like whatever those sorts of things are. I've always just whenever I see someone who's doing something at a really high level, I'm just how do you do that? Thinking about bass trombone for me, it's when I was in the Disney band with Reggie Chapman being the bass trombone player. At that point in time, I'd already gotten a bass trombone. I had some, I could play it. But what Reggie was doing was blowing my mind, and I was just bothering him all the time, just hey, show me that. What are you working on? Why do you think about it that way? What's going on in your brain? That's how I would always kind of go about it. So how was experience in college? Gosh, that's a long question, but I would say overall good. I kept coming back for more, so that says something.
Yeah.
Either doing the same thing, expecting different results, or something along those lines. But yeah, I mean, I think music school can be a really good thing, depending on where you go. I mean, there's so many factors, and not one school is perfect for everything. When I'm thinking about picking a school, and when I help my students choose schools or choose their next school or whatever, it's basically more or less 4 things. Who's the teacher? Is that teacher a good player, good teacher? And also, are they a good teacher for you? You should have a lesson with them. And then the next thing is, are the ensembles, are the other players at the school good? Because, I think Connor would agree with me that it's not just about, when we were at UNT and there were 70 other trombone players, it wasn't just about those other trombone players. It was also about all of the trumpet players, all the saxophone players, all the tuba players, all the different instruments. That was helpful. And sometimes you can find a school that's just got the best teacher for your instrument, and then it's not everyone around you is quite on the same level. So finding a balanced school in that way is helpful, and then finding a school that's good kind of in the bubble of music academics and academics in general, I think is helpful. And then geographically, one with opportunity outside of school, I think is really important, which,
Yes.
I think that the schools that we went to, most of them offered, something as far as that goes, playing outside of school, that was really helpful. Do you have anything you want to add to that, Connor?
Yeah, I could talk a little bit about college experience. I think that Zach and I ended up kind of lining up there towards the end of my college experiences. Like, we had a lot of analogous experiences, but I think the beginning of our time was very different, but both were appropriate. And it's probably important to talk about both. When I first made the decision to go to college, I don't even think I want to give it like the gravity of saying it was a decision. I didn't really have a plan. I didn't have my playing together. I didn't take lessons regularly. I just knew there wasn't anything else that I was good at doing. And I had a nice, compassionate band director who knew that if I put the time in, could make something of myself, and twisted my arm and convinced me to go be a music ed major at a small college in Kentucky, Western Kentucky University. Great school.
Go Hilltoppers.
And go Hilltoppers. So what I didn't need at that time, I don't think that I needed the competitive conservatory environment. Would I have benefited from it? Absolutely. And then once I realized that I got a little taste of like practicing, and I checked out like Jamie Aebersold, then started listening to records, and I realized like, oh, I could do the playing thing more seriously. This could be fun. That ended up being a lot of work on nights and weekends, but you can do it. And I would say that I don't think that my going to a small school hindered my development as a musician overall through my path of life. Though, had you asked me that while I was an undergrad and I knew that I was going to try to go to North Texas, I would have said, I don't know anything. I'm so confused. I'm lost. All those guys at those big schools, they know so much more than me. They're probably practicing right now. And that was something I used to think all the time, was thinking about the people at the big schools. Like, oh man, they're probably in some nice practice room right now. I better start practicing. I think that
the practice rooms aren't nice, but
then I got to, no, don't say any ill things.
Yeah.
No, they were fine. They were great. They were there, and there were lots of them at UNT. That's one good thing you can say about those practice. There's a lot of them.
Right. It's a numbers game. But yeah,
you can find a room.
But also, I think what you found was that it wasn't just about what was going on at school. And yes, we think about schools where you go to learn, but no matter what school I went to, that wasn't all of it. Especially thinking about my time in Chicago when I was going to school at Northwestern. I was a tuba performance major. I had no ties to the trombone studio, but at that point in time, I was really getting a lot better very quickly at trombone stuff because of what I was doing in the real world, in Chicago, not in a practice room in Evanston looking out at Lake Michigan. I was going to sessions, I was playing with people who were better than me, all of those sorts of things. So college is a very helpful thing for getting better, but I think anyone who thinks that that's going to just do everything, no matter what school it is, I think you're missing the point a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And I will say, there was absolutely an abundance of musicians that pushed me musically and kicked my butt on a regular basis at Western Kentucky University. There just weren't 70 trombone players. We had,
Right.
I think the biggest our studio ever was like 12. You know, so like I made lifelong friends that really pushed me in that studio that were world-class musicians. We just didn't have a small army of us. And
Right.
the one other thing, and I'll get off of the college experience thing, the biggest reason I don't regret going to a small college was that I was fortunate enough to have been pushed by people wiser than me to go and get my teacher cert. And that's not the only way to do it. And that's not the only way to make a living as a musician, but it is a trade and it is a job that you can always have. And that is one way out of thousands, but it is one really surefire, reliable way to make sure that you will have some sort of stability on which to build your creative autonomy as an artist. Because you might be fortunate enough that you end up going to grad school in a town with a scene. You might not. And so it's a great way to have a trade that you can do. And it's a bonus that it's music adjacent, and also it helps you serve the art form, you know, in your own time. So there you go. That's my college spiel.
Yeah, I mean, especially, you know, Mr. Anonymous, you're here pretty often. If you have more specific questions about it, we definitely are more or less open books. So, you know, you can, steer our conversation a little bit, but we'll keep going on. Try to get to each comment pretty quickly.
Yes,
but
definitely.
It's hard. And there's already a delay with streaming, so it's like added time.
That's right.
Let's see. Harrison says, on my small horn, I use a 6.5 AL mouthpiece, and it feels good. I'll be on lead in jazz next year, and I like the lead sound on my 12C. I'm way less comfortable on it. Should I work up the 12C, or is it not worth it? Great question. With an unfortunately not simple answer. I feel if Connor, you have a simple answer, feel free to share it. I think Connor and I share a lot of views, and I'm probably both ashamed at how often we have phone calls that are mostly about mouthpieces. It's probably unhealthy.
It's a lot,
but it's helpful.
Yeah.
I think it's more helpful than harmful, but talking about mouthpieces can be more harmful. And I think the way we approach it is more or less helpful. You can definitely go the route of, I'm playing this, I need this mouthpiece and things. And I think for both of us, it's like we've got a always growing collection of mouthpieces, and we have the one that we use for this thing, but we don't think that everything is tied up in that singular mouthpiece, and that's the only one that we can use for this. So what I'll tell you is kind of like my personal sort of setup with mouthpieces that I like. Whenever I go to a jazz gig, whenever I go, or I guess big band is a better way to say it, I probably wouldn't use the 12C in a small group jazz gig sort of thing. But like when I go play any commercial thing or anything like that with a small bore tenor trombone, inside of my case is a 7C, a Dennis Wick Heritage 7CS, and a classic 12CS. And depending on what I'm doing, I go back and forth. And I've had those I've had that 12C for more than a decade. I've had that 7C for 6 years, not exactly sure, but enough time. And what I would say is that I always feel more comfortable on the bigger mouthpiece, but the 12 for me in general has this. It's easier to get the sound that I want. So it's pretty much the exact same thing that you're dealing with. And what I would probably encourage you to do, I don't know exactly how old you are, I don't know exactly your development, but just kind of making an educated guess, I would probably stick to the larger mouthpiece for now, unless unless you can't do the job. And when I play,
probably good advice.
When I play lead in a big band, I'll use both mouthpieces. It just depends on the day, especially. I'm not playing in a big band for my job. It's not like playing it lead trombone in a big band is the breadwinner. So a lot of times it's, let's see how this one goes tonight. I'll play the whole 3-hour gig on this mouthpiece. We'll see if we give today a W, if we give today an L. And I'm at a point where I can make that sort of thing. And then, sometimes it's like, this really isn't working, I'm going to switch. Usually it's not quite that drastic. But I like playing a larger mouthpiece. Most of my mouthpieces across all of the instruments are on the larger side. And I can play a big band gig on lead on a bigger mouthpiece, but depending on what's being played, that might be more work than I want. And it might, to me, it's the sound isn't always what I want on lead on a bigger mouthpiece. And to me, sound, I can work through, you can work through sound problems or sound, not getting the sound you want in your head. But when a piece of equipment does the sound thing you want, it's hard to argue with. And the way that I tend to play lead trombone in a big band is a little bit more redlining the instrument more often. If I weren't doing that, and I'm not saying you should or should not do that, but if you're not doing that, maybe you don't need to play a 12. But what are your thoughts, Connor? Maybe take us through what you've used and what your thoughts are.
Well, I like to start most mouthpiece discussions with the fact that I played from my very, very first note in 6th grade band up to the 1 o'clock lab band in grad school on a 6.5 AL. Didn't touch anything else, didn't change anything else, didn't really think to. So you can, I kind of come from the school of thought of just like make it work. It's like, take the note on page, bark it out. It's kind of everything about the trombone for me is kind of a crude science in that sort of way. It's not really particularly glamorous. So I would say if it feels good now and it's fine, probably don't worry about it. Also, on the other side of it, if you try it and you like it, sure.
Right.
I've played lots of big band gigs on 12s. I've played lots of big band gigs on Dennis Wick 10s and 7s. And some 5 sometimes on accident, but
they look the same,
They all look the same. I don't know the difference. So yeah, I would say you have nothing to lose by trying it, but also, there's something to be said about just having the consistency of it.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too that's important for maybe others that are listening to this is you, at least the way that you're presenting this, you already have both of these mouthpieces. This would be a different discussion if you said, hey, I have this mouthpiece, I tried this one for my friend and I want to buy this mouthpiece so it solves all my problems. That's a different discussion and we probably would have a much different response. But since you have both of these mouthpieces, do which one works and also what the people around you think sounds good. Ask your jazz band director what they think sounds the best. My main gig is in a horn section of tenor saxophone, trombone, and trumpet. And generally speaking, if the trumpet player says, hey, I like this piece of equipment, I can tell when you're playing this, it sounds good, it's easier for me. That's the phrase that I listen for. And we talked about it, not even, it was last month or something, maybe it was even this month, it wasn't very long ago, and I'd been playing the 12 more or less for the whole gig for years at this point. And I was switching to the 7 because, I must play big mouthpiece and see if I can, if I'm strong enough to do it, all those, trite things that, don't matter. But I switched to the 7 and, I didn't even ask him and he was just kind of like, then I went back to the 12. I played maybe 5 gigs on the 7. I could do my job. I could play all my high notes. I could play everything that I needed to. Some things were easier for me. Some things were slightly harder. That's how it goes. And I switched back to the 12, and he was just like that one's easier for me to tune with. That's the one that's just easier all around. And it's just like, well, when a coworker is saying that you're making their life easier, it's kind of hard to argue with that and say, I disagree, you're wrong, or, it's like they're telling you their experience, and it's important to me, especially, in a horn section that we're essentially a unit of 3 people, and we need to make it where it works for all of us. And so maybe if you have a second trombone player that, you trust, maybe ask for them. It might be easier. It might be easier for the bass trombone player across the section to hear you better playing on the 12C. which is important. You know, you might want to cut through more. You know, it might lock in better with the trumpet player. So it's, you know, I would say, you know, mess around with it for a little while and then kind of make your decision. I really stuck to the same mouthpieces, similar to Connor. You know, my story is like my tuba mouthpiece. I got my Schilke 67 in, I want to say 7th grade, might have even been 6th grade, and I played that all the way till the end of my master's degree. Like the same mouthpiece, this mouthpiece right here. Schilke 67, you know, tarnished gold plating now. Still is relatively plated well, but, you know, this mouthpiece I used for maybe 12 years, and I really didn't switch from it because I hated it. I just, you know, tried a bunch of Dennis Wicks and found one that I liked a little bit more, I thought. Then, you know, beat it with a lot of people listening, and they all preferred the Dennis Wicks, so it's just like, well, that's hard to argue with. So for me, that was kind of my, like, that was the longest standing mouthpiece for me. But even the Dennis Wick 12 I've had for more than a decade. So I guess I would say that I think especially when you're younger, high school age students, I tend to feel that most people are switching mouthpieces too often, and also expecting it to, you know, solve world hunger by switching it to it. You know, it's not gonna save the world by switching to some mouthpiece and making everything easier. So let's see. We got another. Mr. Anonymous has another question here. How much time do you recommend practicing for a performance major? It's a good question. I don't know that all of these don't really have a simple answer. But, you know, it's complicated. You can only play so many hours in a day as a brass player, I would say. And, well, maybe I'll let Connor give his thoughts first.
Well, my trick answer to that is it doesn't matter what major you are. How much do you need to practice to accomplish the goals that you have? If you are intending to either win a job or become a university professor, then you need to be having some sort of consistent musical thoughts every day for as much as you can focus intensely on it. And then the rest of your day lead some sort of sustainable life that nurtures that efficient block of time that you have so that it grows or becomes more efficient or starts looking more like the goals that you're trying to manifest. So you could look to specific numbers, like J.J. Johnson was like, I stop playing. The second that I feel like it hurts, I stop because I know that I'm destroying my chops at that point, if we're talking about horn on the face. And then it depends on what type of job you want. If you're trying to get into an orchestra, you need to be listening to lots of excerpts and master classes and comparing different orchestras playing the same thing. If you're doing the jazz improvised music thing, you need to be going out to sessions or listening to records or transcribing. So you can think about it as like, maybe you can't play 24 hours a day, but there's other musical things you can do inside the day that serve whatever your goal is. So it might help you if you're thinking about, it's not necessarily important how many hours you're doing. It's, if your goal is coming up, like at the end of your degree program, let's say it's in 4 years, what do you have to do? What macro goals do you have to achieve whatever that goal is in 4 years? And then figure out, what are the steps in between where you are now and what that goal is. And then you can figure out there's certain benchmarks that you need to be hitting. And in order to hit those benchmarks of proficiency or playing or connections or opportunities that you create for yourself, there's probably some sort of semester, monthly, weekly, daily goals that you can be setting that are incrementally getting you to that point. So I don't know if I could really give you an hour. Some people say 3.
Yeah, so I'll answer it a couple of different ways. First, kind of going off of what Connor is saying, and that maybe don't think about it as just horn on face time. And what I would go with that is, I'm not an expert on how people do things at European conservatories, but one thing that I've heard is that they don't talk about music practice, they talk about music study. And I think that idea of studying music and learning about it instead of just, how many seconds did you play long tones for? How many repetitions of these excerpts, or did you do, or these lip slurs, or whatever the case may be. I think that that's a good way of thinking about it, and it really applies to no matter what style of music, whatever your goals are. To me, you need to be spending as much time listening as you're actually practicing, which I think that overall, so much of what we do with teaching music and studying music is thought about just like, I need to practice. I need to be playing my scales. I need to be playing these exercises. I need to be playing these excerpts. You learn more from listening to a bunch of orchestras for an excerpt than you do over and over again playing the same excerpt. That, to me anyway. So I think thinking about it as music study, and yes, there are elements that get better with like face time, having the horn on the face. That is definitely you're not going to get endurance by listening to 10 different orchestras play Ride of the Valkyries. That your endurance is not going to get better. You might understand that rhythm more. You might understand the style more. You might understand the overall character more. But that's not going to help your endurance. That's not going to help your range, probably. There's a lot of things that doesn't really solve. So I guess that's part of it. And then one thing that I will say that I don't necessarily perfectly agree with or necessarily, but one of the ways it's been explained to me, and I've heard this from multiple sources, so I would say it's how some people think about it, is that when you're thinking about how many hours you should be practicing, it should reflect how many hours it is at a college, how many hours your lesson is. So for a lot of, most of the time it's anywhere from 2 to 4 credit hours, and a lot of people say that should reflect 2 to 4 hours of practicing a day. But I think it's also, I think we're in a world now that we understand mental health a little bit better. We're still not there. And I guess my answer would be, if you want to win a job, you should be practicing, or you should be studying music as much as you can without negatively impacting your mental health.
There you go.
And I think
that's a good answer.
I think that kind of solves it, but it's not. That's not the same for everybody, and it's not the same for you today as it is tomorrow, as it is, next week, or next year, or 5 years from now. There are times in my life where I practice a ridiculous amount. There are times where I practiced a good amount. I rarely hit these spots where I don't practice a lot, or hardly at all. But sometimes that's what I need mental health wise. And, you have to think about it as a long-term process, and not just it's not just about today.
Right.
So we're about running out of time. So if you have a few other questions, try to get them in pretty quickly. I'm not even going to be ashamed to admit it. I've got to get to the Lakers and Milwaukee Bucks game.
There you go.
So it's technically 9 p.m., but it'll probably start a little bit later. So I've got a little bit of time. So get your questions in now. So Brady asks, any tips for preparation for a college marching band audition? That's kind of a tricky thing, because in my experience, they're either specific music that you're supposed to be playing, or sometimes it's open-ended. And so those are kind of two separate sort of lines of thinking or advice. Do you have something you want to say, Connor?
Oh, no, I was just looking at my cat.
Gotcha.
But I can add to it if you want me to.
Sure. Yeah. What do you got?
I mean, I would say it's the basic advice that I would give for anyone. I don't think that this is limited to a marching band audition. And this is something that I've definitely got better at by the time I was in grad school, but really actually go look at the audition criteria before you go take the audition. I speak from experience that you don't want to bring a Jim Snydero etude to the Cincinnati Conservatory of Music for a trombone performance degree audition. It's not going to work out. They wanted you to play the excerpts that they put on the website. You probably should learn those, but I'm speaking.
That's an important thing that seems really obvious. I mean, Brady's saying that it's a swing jazz excerpt. So you're halfway there. You know what they're asking. So
Doing better than me.
right. So what I would say is if you can find where that excerpt comes from, try to listen to it a lot. I don't know specifically what that is, but if you can, the notes and rhythms are on the page. The style, there's some indicators of style that are on the page, but you need to listen to it really to know. And that's how I would go about it. I would try to show that I'm really thoughtful about, if you assign me something, if you ask me to play something, I'm going to do the research. Because especially in today's day and age, there's so many good players. Not everybody does their homework.
Right.
Not everybody does the behind the scenes work. It's like I think about like when I was in school, like playing in an ensemble. It's like let's say you're playing in symphonic band and there's you're going to play this piece. You go get your music and you're playing these 5 pieces. The first thing I do is go see what recordings I can find of those. Mm-hmm. And sometimes those recordings, especially in today's day and age, sometimes it's really easy. You can go to YouTube and find a great recording. Sometimes you might have to go to a library. Sometimes you might have to go to a second library. Sometimes you might have to give your email address for some streaming service and do a 7-day trial or something like that. Whatever it takes to get that information. I mean, I've had to, especially, Connor and I are used to not having the internet be quite as helpful as it is today. You have to dig pretty deep sometimes. And even now, there might be one recording of the piece that you're trying to find. It could be especially in ensembles, we often play new music. So
right.
If you're trying to find that, there might not be a recording. And then what do? You try to find music by that composer or in that style potentially. There are tons of different ways to go about it. Do you have any other thoughts, Connor? Seems like you got a cat situation.
We got a little cat situation, but I can also answer a little bit about that. I would say that there's kind of a phrase that I liked one time when I was taking an audition and I was getting advice from people who were already in the band. They said, when we have people come in here and audition for this group, whatever you give to us that day, we call that's as good as it gets. Like this is a microcosm of what you're going to be like in our band. And so what they're looking for is in a finite amount of time, this might be easier music in a shorter amount of time than what you would do over the marching season. But in that amount of time, this is as good of a musical product as you can make. So what they're trying to see is a musician that can take notes on a page and turn that around into a musical product. So always kind of be thinking about it in that sort of way and kind of giving the music the time it deserves. And that can look like practicing, that can look like listening, it can look like a lot of things. But I think it's a lot of the good stuff that you've already said, Zach. So just that type of preparation. I would also say if it's marching band, if it says forte, give them the juice,
Yeah. So let's call this last one the last question of the night. So
sure.
Wesley says, do you have any advice for a player picking up his, I assume, instrument after years of not playing? So I think one of the simple things with that is it's not going to be just like the day you left it. And go slow.
It might be.
It could be, but you're probably not going to have. I think people get lulled in a sense of it is, and you might be able to have some of the things that you left it, but you're probably not going to have like the endurance, and you probably won't have the range. Sometimes you can have the range, but not always. And I guess the biggest thing that I would say is go slow. Don't do anything. It's like getting in a car that you haven't driven and like barely started, and you just floor it. Don't do that.
Right.
Check the fluids. Make sure that it's got gas in it. All of those sorts of things. Do the maintenance, and also kind of your personal maintenance of, do those lip slurs, do those Remington exercises that you were doing when you last stopped. Kind of get back to where you were. But I don't think you're starting at square one. I think you just have to be smart about what you're doing, and even if things are going really, really well, maybe relax a little bit and don't think that you need to, go super, super hard with it right at the beginning. Any thoughts, Connor?
Definitely. I would say a lot of good points. The big thing for me, I would imagine, is what you've done and your decision to come back to a musical instrument after taking some time off is such a good move for you as a creative person and for your mental health. And it's just such a wonderful thing that it would behoove you to set up systems and procedures that allow for grace and patience, because it would be such a shame if you made this great decision to get back into this musical space and then the immediate frustration that we know would come of like maybe the ones and zeros technical side of a musical instrument, letting that get in the way, frustration, impatience, or whatever. So just like kind of knowing what's coming up ahead, I think is important to think about. And I would say, definitely like whenever you take any time, it could be a day, it could be years. First thing that's going to go is your endurance. So that would be something to be mindful of when you're getting back into practice. And what I would say is, whenever and this would be the same for the people practicing in this thread for marching band auditions or performance majors, whatever you can do regularly is so much more important than what you can do for a long, long time on one day. And so you got to think like, okay, I'm kind of easing myself back onto the horn. What's like the least amount of work that I can do so that I could call it a win and get the checkbox, but I can definitely do that incrementally, whether that's every day or a few times a week or whatever it ends up being for you. Like, what's that easiest version of that I know 100% will let me be in this musical space regularly? Because the chances are you're going to have fun and it's going to be this great thing that's going to bring up all these great musical memories. You probably won't just practice for 15 minutes if that's like your first goal. You'll probably go a little longer. But if you say, I got to pick up the horn and just play it, make some noise for 15 minutes, it's usually the starting for me, I'm speaking for myself, is the hardest part. And then if I can get myself going, then I end up having a ton of fun. So yeah, enjoy it. That's awesome. So yeah.
Awesome. I think that's a good place to call the show for tonight. But thank you everyone for watching and I think we had some really good questions today.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun.
A lot of good content to kind of cover. So we'll see everyone next week at the same time, same place, and we'll catch you next time. All right.
Bye.
All right. We are no longer live.